The wind carried dust and memories across the barren plains of Cedar Ridge, a town so small it barely warranted a dot on any map worth its salt. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the distant mountains in shades of amber and rust, while tumbleweeds danced their lonely waltz down the main street. It was the kind of evening that made folks hurry inside, away from the bite of approaching autumn and the weight of unspoken stories that seemed to linger in the air. Clara Bennett stood on the porch of her modest homestead, her weathered hands gripping the rough wooden railing. At 27, she possessed a beauty that had been tempered by hardship, high cheekbones that caught the dying light, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes the color of prairie grass after rain. Those eyes, once bright with hope, now held a guarded quality that spoke of too many sunsets watched alone. 5 years. It had been 5 long years since Samuel Hayes had ridden out of Cedar Ridge, his promise hanging in the air like morning mist. "Wait for me, Clara. I'll come back for you." She could still see him clearly in her mind's eye, tall and lean, with a sandy hair that refused to stay beneath his hat and hands gentle enough to break a horse, yet strong enough to build a future. Or so she had believed. The townspeople had been kind at first, offering sympathetic smiles and reassuring words. "He'll be back," they'd said. "A man doesn't leave a woman like you behind for good." But as seasons turned to years, their sympathy had curdled into something else entirely. Pity, perhaps, or worse, judgment. Poor Clara Bennett. She'd overheard Mrs. Henderson whisper at the general store just last week. "Still waiting for that cowboy who left her high and dry. Some women just don't know when to let go." The words had stung more than Clara cared to admit. She'd held her head high, purchased her flour and coffee, and walked out without acknowledging she'd heard. But late at night, when the coyotes howled and the wind rattled her windows, those words echoed in the darkness of her bedroom. She moved inside as the evening chill set in, her boots clicking against the wooden floors that Samuel had helped her father lay down years ago. The house felt too large for one person, too full of shadows and silence. In the kitchen, she lit the oil lamp and set about preparing her simple supper beans and cornbread, the same meal she'd eaten countless times before. As she worked, her mind drifted to that last morning. Samuel had been different somehow, restless like a Mustang sensing a storm. He'd talked about opportunities further west, about gold strikes and cattle drives that could make a man's fortune. "I need to make something of myself, Clara," he'd said, his blue eyes intense with dreams she couldn't quite grasp. "I can't ask you to marry a man with nothing but a worn saddle and a half-broke horse to his name." She'd tried to tell him she didn't care about fortunes or fancy houses. All she'd wanted was him, his laughter filling their home, his arms around her after a long day's work, children with his stubborn chin and her determined spirit. But he'd been deaf to her pleas, blind to everything but the horizon calling his name. The cornbread was burning. Clara yanked the skillet from the stove, cursing softly as smoke filled the kitchen. Through the haze, she caught sight of her reflection in the window glass, a woman alone, surrounded by the remnants of a meal meant for one. Is this what she'd become? The abandoned woman of Cedar Ridge? A cautionary tale whispered to young girls about the dangers of giving your heart too freely? Outside, the evening stretched into night. Clara forced herself to eat, though the food tasted like ash in her mouth. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. Sunrise over empty plains, the endless work of maintaining the homestead her parents had left her, the weight of loneliness that pressed against her chest like a physical thing. She'd survived drought that had driven other families from their land. She'd buried both parents within 6 months of each other, their bodies claimed by the fever that had swept through Cedar Ridge 3 winters past. She'd fought off claim jumpers and predators, both animal and human, who thought a woman alone was easy prey. The land had hardened her, shaped her into something stronger than the girl who'd once danced at barn raisings and believed in forever. But Samuel's leaving had wounded her in ways that sun and wind and isolation never could. It was a hurt that went bone deep, that flared up at unexpected moments, when she saw couples at Sunday service, when she heard children playing in town, when she woke in the middle of the night reaching for a warmth that was no longer there. Clara extinguished the lamp and made her way to bed, her movements automatic after years of the same routine. In the darkness, she allowed herself one moment of weakness, pressing her face into the pillow to muffle the sound of her grief. Tomorrow, she would rise with the sun and face another day with the stoic determination that had become her armor. But tonight, in the privacy of her empty room, she mourned the life that might have been. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human suffering, while somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the plains, a sound that always made her wonder if Samuel had heard it too, wherever he was, if he ever thought of her, if he remembered his promise. 5 years was a long time to wait. But what else was there for her now? Cedar Ridge was her home. This land was her heritage. And despite everything, some stubborn part of her heart still hoped. It was a hope she'd never speak aloud, never admit to anyone. But it lived within her like a banked fire, small, perhaps, but refusing to be completely extinguished, as sleep finally claimed her. Clara Bennett didn't know that 300 miles away. A man with sandy hair and weathered hands was saddling his horse, his face turned toward Cedar Ridge and the woman he'd never stopped loving. The wheel of fate was turning, bringing with it a reckoning 5 years in the making. But for now, there was only the night, the wind, and a woman's quiet breathing in a house too full of memories and too empty of life. The morning Samuel Hayes rode back into Cedar Ridge, the town seemed to hold its breath. It was market day, with farmers and ranchers gathered along Main Street, but conversations stuttered to a halt as the lone rider appeared through the shimmering heat waves. His horse was different, a sturdy bay instead of the spirited paint he'd left on, and the man himself had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Gone was the fresh-faced young cowboy with dreams bigger than his experience. This Samuel sat his horse like a man who'd ridden through hell and back, his shoulders broader, his jaw shadowed with stubble that couldn't quite hide a scar running from ear to chin. His clothes were trail-worn but quality leather chaps that had seen better days, a coat that spoke of northern winters, and boots that had walked more miles than most men saw in a lifetime. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Tom Garrett from his position outside the saloon. "If it ain't Sam Hayes come crawling back." The whispers spread like wildfire through the dusty street. Women pulled their children closer. Men exchanged meaningful glances, and more than one person made the quick walk to the general store where they knew Clara Bennett would be purchasing her weekly supplies. Clara was examining a bolt of calico, running her fingers over the faded blue flowers, when Martha Henderson burst through the door like a hen with news of a fox. "Clara," she gasped, her face flushed with the excitement of being the first to tell. "He's back! Samuel Hayes just rode in." The bolt of fabric slipped from Clara's fingers, unrolling across the floor in a river of blue. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis, and she gripped the counter to steady herself. 5 years of waiting, of wondering, of building walls around her heart brick by stubborn brick. And now, Clara, Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper, peered at her with concern. "You all right, miss?" She straightened, her spine steel and her chin lifted. "I'm fine." The words came out steady, belying the storm raging in her chest. She bent to retrieve the fabric, rolled it carefully, and placed it back on the shelf. "I'll take the coffee and flour. Mr. Peterson, put it on my account." Outside, the sun seemed too bright, the air too thin. Clara loaded her purchases into the wagon with mechanical precision, aware of the eyes upon her, the hushed conversations that stopped whenever she drew near. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She would not be the abandoned woman running to see if her cowboy had truly returned. But her traitorous eyes betrayed her, scanning the street until they found him. He stood outside the livery stable, talking to Ed Sullivan about boarding his horse, even from across the street. She could see the changes, the way he favored his left leg slightly, the cautious way he moved as if expecting trouble, the new lines etched around his eyes. Then, As if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met across the dusty expanse of Main Street, and Clara felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes, still that piercing blue that had haunted her dreams, but holding depths of experience that hadn't been there before. She saw the moment he recognized her, saw something flicker across his face. Hope, perhaps, or regret, or both tangled together like barbed wire. He took a step toward her. She turned away, climbing onto her wagon seat with as much dignity as she could muster. But her hands shook as she gathered the reins, and she knew he saw it, knew everyone saw it. "Clara," his voice, rougher now with an edge of gravel, stopped her before she could snap the reins. He'd crossed the street faster than his limp should have allowed, and now stood beside her wagon, looking up at her with an expression that threatened to undo all her carefully constructed defenses. "Mr. Hayes." The formal address was a slap, and she saw him flinch. Good. Let him feel a fraction of what she'd endured. "I heard you'd left town. I'm surprised to see you've returned. Clara, please, let me explain." "Explain?" The word came out sharp as a blade. 5 years. Samuel, 5 years I waited while you chased your fortune. 5 years of watching the seasons change, of people whispering behind their hands about poor Clara Bennett, the woman whose man left her behind like excess baggage. It wasn't like that. His hand reached for the wagon wheel as if he needed support. "I wrote letters that never came." She looked down at him, and for a moment, her mask slipped. He saw the hurt, raw and deep, before she shuddered it away. "I waited for you. Do you know what that means? Do you have any idea what you left me to face alone?" The crowd that had been pretending not to watch gave up all pretense. This was better than any traveling show. The abandoned woman confronting the prodigal cowboy in the middle of Main Street. Samuel's jaw worked, and she could see him fighting for words. "I got lost, Clara, not just on the trail, but in every way a man can get lost. There were Indians, bandits, a winter that nearly killed me in Montana. I was shot twice, spent 6 months in a Denver hospital learning to walk again. By the time I could send word, I figured you'd have married someone else. Someone better." "You figured?" Her laugh was bitter as alkali water. "You figured I'd just forget? Move on like you meant nothing?" She gathered the reins tighter, needing to leave before she broke entirely. "Well, you figured wrong. Samuel Hayes, I waited. Like a fool. I waited." She snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward, but not before she heard his reply, carried on the wind like a prayer. "I came back for you. Clara, I came back to make it right." The ride home was a blur of dust and unshed tears. Clara drove faster than was wise, needing the distance, needing the solitude of her homestead where she could fall apart without an audience. Behind her, she knew the town was buzzing with this latest development. The abandoned woman and the returned cowboy. It would feed gossip for weeks. By the time she reached home, anger had overtaken hurt. How dare he return now? After she'd learned to live without him? After she'd built a life from the ashes of broken promises? She unhitched the horses with sharp, efficient movements, her mind replaying every word, every look, every moment of their encounter. Inside, she paced the kitchen like a caged mountain cat. Part of her, the treacherous part that still remembered how his arms felt around her, wanted to believe his story. Shot twice, months in a hospital? The Samuel she'd known had been strong as an oak, invincible in the way of young men who hadn't yet learned their own mortality. But the man she'd seen today bore scars, visible and invisible. No. She slammed her palm on the table, making the dishes rattle. She would not soften. He'd made his choice 5 years ago when he'd valued his dreams over their love. She'd survived the leaving. She'd survived the return. But as afternoon faded to evening, and she went about her chores with mechanical precision, Clara couldn't shake the image of him standing in the dusty street, looking up at her with those changed eyes. Couldn't forget the rough timbre of his voice saying her name like a benediction. When she'd told him she'd waited, she'd seen something break in his expression. Good, she thought fiercely. Let him taste regret. Let him understand what his leaving had cost. She'd waited 5 years for the cowboy who left her. Now that he'd returned, he'd learned that some wounds cut too deep for easy healing. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain the parched earth desperately needed. Clara watched them build, dark and ominous, and thought they matched her mood perfectly. Samuel Hayes had ridden back into her life like those clouds, unexpected, potentially destructive, and impossible to ignore. She just prayed she was strong enough to weather whatever storm was coming. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Clara heard the sound of hammering. She'd been awake since before dawn, unable to find rest after a night of tossing and turning, her mind churning over Samuel's return. Now, coffee cup in hand, she stepped onto her porch to find him repairing her broken fence rail, his shirt already damp with sweat despite the early hour. "What do you think you're doing?" The words came out sharper than the morning air. Samuel straightened, wiping his brow with his forearm. In the soft morning light, she could see more clearly the changes 5 years had wrought. The deep lines around his eyes, the way his left shoulder sat slightly lower than his right, the careful way he moved that spoke of old injuries. "Your fence needs mending," he said simply. "Noticed it yesterday when I rode past. My fence is none of your concern." She gripped her coffee cup tighter. "I've managed just fine without you," he nodded, accepting the barb without flinching. "I can see that. Place looks good. Clara, better than when your PA ran it." He gestured toward the well-maintained outbuildings, the garden plot already showing green shoots. "You've done well." The unexpected compliment caught her off guard, and she hated how it warmed something inside her. "Don't think you can just show up here and—" "I'm not thinking anything," he interrupted gently. "Just figured I owed you 5 years' worth of chores. Might as well start with the fence." She wanted to order him off her property, wanted to maintain the cold distance that protected her heart, but practicality warred with pride. The fence did need fixing, had needed it for months, and her own attempts had been temporary at best. Still, accepting his help felt like a crack in her armor. "Fine," she said curtly, "but I can't pay you. Don't want payment." He turned back to his work, the hammer ringing against the nails in steady rhythm. "Just want to help." Clara retreated inside, but found herself drawn to the window, watching him work. His movements were different now, more measured, favoring his left leg when he knelt, occasionally pausing to stretch his back. What had happened to him out there, despite herself? She wondered about those missing years, the stories written in scars and careful movements. By midday, word had spread that Samuel Hayes was working at the Bennett place. Clara saw the dust of approaching horses and groaned inwardly. Sure enough, Luke Morrison and his brother Jake rode up, their faces wearing matching smirks that she'd come to despise. Well, Luke drawled, not bothering to dismount. "Heard your cowboy came crawling back. Clara, guess he figured you'd been pining away for him all these years." Samuel straightened from his work, his hand moving instinctively toward his hip where a gun might have been. But he wore no weapon, just tools. "Morrison," his voice carried a warning that would have given smarter men pause. Jake laughed, an ugly sound. "Look at him, playing house already. Tell me, Hayes, what's it like knowing the whole town's been speculating about your woman while you were gone? She's been quite the topic of conversation at the saloon." Clara stepped onto the porch, her rifle cradled casually in her arms. "You boys have business here, because if not, I'll thank you to move along." "Just being neighborly," Luke said, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Wanted to remind you that my offer still stands. A woman needs a man around, and since yours ran off once already—" The hammer flew past Luke's head, close enough to knock his hat into the dust. Samuel stood empty-handed now, his stance deceptively relaxed. "You'll want to watch your mouth when speaking to the lady." Jake's hand moved toward his gun, but Luke stopped him. Now, no need for unpleasantness. We're just looking out for Clara's interests. After all, she's been alone so long, might not be thinking clearly." "I think clearly enough to know trash when I see it," Clara said evenly. And I see 2 pieces of it sitting on horses in my yard. You've got 10 seconds to be gone." Luke's face darkened. "You always were too proud for your own good." Clara Bennett. "Man offers honest marriage, and you'd rather pine for a saddle tramp who—" The rifle shot split the air, Luke's hat flying from his head with a neat hole through the crown. Clara worked the lever, chambering another round. "That was your 10 seconds. The Morrison brothers wheeled their horses around, Jake shouting threats about coming back, about teaching them both a lesson. But they rode off, and Clara knew they were cowards at heart, only brave when the odds favored them. She lowered the rifle to find Samuel watching her with something like admiration. "Nice shot. I've had 5 years to practice." She turned to go inside, then paused. "They'll be back, probably with friends." "I know." He retrieved his hammer from where it had landed. "I'll be ready. This isn't your fight." "It is now." He met her gaze steadily. "They disrespected you. That makes it my business. You gave up the right to defend my honor when you rode out 5 years ago." The words came out tired rather than angry. He absorbed that, nodding slowly. "You're right, but I'm here now, and I won't let them hurt you." That evening, Clara found herself setting 2 plates for supper, a habit she'd broken years ago. Samuel had worked through the day, not just on the fence, but fixing the loose boards on her stable, patching the chicken coop where coyotes had been trying to break through. She'd watched him covertly, noting how he pushed through obvious pain, how he stopped to catch his breath more often than the Samuel she'd known would have needed to. "This is temporary," she said as he washed up at the pump outside. "Just supper. Payment for the work." "Understood." He dried his hands on his shirt, wincing slightly at the movement. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the clink of forks against plates and the evening wind starting up outside. Finally, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. "Your shoulder and your leg." "What happened?" Samuel set down his fork carefully. "The shoulder was courtesy of claim jumpers outside Denver. Took exception to me passing through their territory. The leg—" He paused, his jaw working. "Comanche hunting party, 2 winters back. They had every right to be angry. We were on their land, but that didn't make the arrow hurt any less." "Must have been quite an adventure." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "All those experiences, all that freedom." "Freedom?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw depths of pain that matched her own. "Is that what you think I found out there? Freedom. Isn't that what you wanted? To make your fortune? See the world beyond Cedar Ridge?" He pushed his plate away, appetite apparently gone. "I wanted to be worth something. To be the kind of man who could provide for you, give you the life you deserved. Instead, I found out just how small and worthless a man can feel when he's bleeding in the snow, wondering if anyone will even know he died." The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the confident young cowboy who'd left, full of dreams and certainty. This was a man who'd been broken and pieced back together, carrying scars inside and out. "I survived," he continued quietly. "Dragged myself to a trapper's cabin. Spent 3 months healing enough to ride. By then, I'd lost everything. My horse, my gear, the little money I'd saved. Started over in Denver. Worked cattle drives. Saved every penny. Got shot in Abilene. Spent another winter recovering. Each time I started to get ahead, something knocked me back down." Clara found herself leaning forward despite herself. "Why didn't you write? Just one letter. Samuel, just to let me know you were alive." "I did write." The admission came out rough. "Dozen letters, maybe more. Sent them when I could, from whatever town I was in. When you never answered, I figured you'd moved on, found someone better. It wasn't until I met a mail carrier in Wyoming that I learned how many letters never make it through. Indians, bandits, weather, just plain getting lost. The possibility that he'd tried to reach her, that her years of bitter silence might have been based on failed communication rather than abandonment, sat heavy between them. Clara didn't know what to do with this information, how to reconcile it with the anger that had sustained her. "Even if that's true," she said finally, "you still chose to leave. You still decided your dreams mattered more than what we had. I was a fool." The admission came readily, without excuse. A young, proud fool who thought he had to prove himself before he could claim you. I see that now. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Clara stood abruptly, beginning to clear the table. "You should go. People will talk if they see your horse here after dark." He rose as well, favoring his legs slightly after sitting. "Let them talk, but I'll go if that's what you want." He paused at the door. "I meant what I said. Clara, I came back to make things right, however long that takes." After he left, Clara stood in her empty kitchen, confusion replacing the certainty of her anger. The Samuel who'd returned wasn't the boy who'd left. He was harder, damaged, carrying visible and invisible wounds from his years away. But there was something else too, a quiet strength, a determination that hadn't been there before. She touched the new boards he'd hammered into place, solid and true. 5 years she'd waited, 5 years she'd mourned. Now he was here, working her land, defending her honor, sharing his pain with an honesty that the young Samuel never could have managed. When he returned, she made him prove his love. She whispered to the empty room. Well, he was trying. She just didn't know if trying was enough to heal what had been broken. As she prepared for bed, Clara found herself checking the loads in her rifle. The Morrison brothers would be back. Their kind always came back when their pride was pricked. And despite everything, despite the anger and hurt and confusion, she was glad she wouldn't face them alone. That admission, small as it was, felt like the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. The drought began in earnest 3 weeks after Samuel's return. What had started as a dry spell stretched into something more sinister. The creek that fed Clara's property dwindled to a trickle. The grass turned brown and brittle under the relentless sun, and the very air seemed to shimmer with heat that refused to break even at night. Clara stood at the well, hauling up another bucket that was barely half full. The water table was dropping, and she knew that without rain soon, she'd lose everything her parents had built. She'd already lost 2 cows, and the rest were growing gaunt despite her best efforts to find them forage. "Let me help with that." Samuel appeared beside her, as he had every morning for the past weeks, despite her continued coolness toward him. He'd taken a room at Mrs. Palmer's boarding house in town, but rode out each day to work her land without being asked. "I can manage." But even as she said it, her arms trembled with the effort. The lack of water meant every bucket had to be hauled from deeper down, and the work was taking its toll. He gently took the rope from her hands, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that sent an unwanted jolt through her. "I know you can, but you don't have to do it alone." She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself despite the heat. It was getting harder to maintain her walls when he was there every day, quietly working, never pushing, just present, like the Samuel she'd fallen in love with, but tempered by whatever trials he'd faced. "The Hendersons are talking about leaving," she said, changing the subject. "Their well's gone dry completely. They're heading back east before winter." Samuel finished hauling up the bucket, his movements efficient despite the obvious strain on his injured shoulder. "What about you? You can't survive winter without water." "This is my home." The fierceness in her voice surprised them both. "My parents are buried on that hill. Every fence post, every building has our sweat and blood in it. I won't abandon it." "Then we'd better find a solution," he said we so naturally, as if they were partners again, as if 5 years hadn't passed between them. "There is no we, Samuel." But the protest sounded weaker than before, especially when she saw the quiet hurt flash across his face. That afternoon, the heat drove them both to seek shade in the barn while the animals dozed through the worst of it. Clara was mending harnesses while Samuel worked on reinforcing the stalls. The silence between them had shifted over the weeks from hostile to something more like companionable, though she fought against acknowledging it. "You ever think about what would have happened if I'd stayed?" His question came unexpectedly, his voice quiet in the dim barn. Clara's hands stilled on the leather. Every day for the first year. Then I learned to stop torturing myself with what-ifs. I think about it. He didn't look at her, focusing on his work. We'd have been married by now. Probably have a couple young ones running around. I'd have taken over the Smith place when old Tom died. It went for a song to outsiders instead. We'd have built something good here. Stop. The word came out cracked. You can't do this. You can't paint pictures of a life you threw away. He set down his hammer, turning to face her fully. I know I can't change what I did, but Clara, I need you to understand, every day out there, through every trial, every time I thought I wouldn't make it, it was the thought of you that kept me going, the hope that maybe, somehow, I could find my way back. Words, Samuel, just words. But her voice shook because she could see the truth in his eyes, the pain that matched her own. Then let me show you. He moved closer, and she didn't step back. You said when I returned, you'd make me prove my love. Tell me how. Give me a task, a challenge, anything. I'll do whatever it takes. The barn felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Clara could smell the leather and sweat and something uniquely Samuel that brought back memories she'd tried to bury. It's not that simple. You can't just... A shout from outside interrupted her. They both rushed to the barn door to see a dust cloud approaching. Riders. At least 6 of them. Clara's heart sank as she recognized the Morrison brothers in the lead. Get inside the house, Samuel ordered, his whole demeanor changing. The gentleman working in her barn transformed into something harder, more dangerous. This is my property. I won't hide. Clara, please. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. They didn't come to talk. Get your rifle and get inside. I'll handle this. With what? You're not even armed. His smile was grim. There's a Colt .45 in my saddlebag and a Winchester in the scabbard. I learned to never go anywhere without them. Now go. She wanted to argue, but the riders were getting closer, and she could see they meant business. She ran for the house, grabbed her rifle, and took position at the window. The Morrison brothers and 4 other men Clara recognized as drifters and troublemakers reined up in her yard. Luke's face still showed his humiliation from their last encounter. Hayes, Luke called out. We got business with you. Come on out and take what's coming. Samuel emerged from the barn, and Clara's breath caught. Gone was any trace of the gentle man who'd been working her land. This was the man who'd survived whatever horrors he'd faced. Dangerous. Coiled like a spring, his hand resting casual but ready near his holstered gun. 6 against 1? Samuel's voice carried clearly. About the odds I'd expect from you, Morrison. You humiliated me in front of the whole town, Luke snarled, throwing hammers like some kind of circus performer. Time you learned respect. Respect is earned, not taken. Samuel's stance shifted slightly, and Clara recognized the preparation for violence. But if you boys want to dance, let's get to it. Though I should mention, I spent the last 2 years hunting men a lot more dangerous than you for bounty money. Made quite a reputation in Colorado. Clara saw the uncertainty flicker across some faces. Jake Morrison, though, was too drunk or too stupid to care. He's bluffing. 1 broken-down cowboy against 6 of us? 7, Clara called out, letting them see her rifle barrel through the window. And I've got plenty of ammunition. This ain't your fight, woman, Luke called back, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Everything on this property is my fight. She chambered around loud enough for them to hear. And right now, you're trespassing. The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Then one of the drifters, Clara thought his name was Collins, spoke up. I didn't sign on to fight no woman, Morrison. And if Hayes is who I think he is, he put 3 men in the ground in Pueblo last year, all legal like. You yellow? Jake snarled, but Collins was already turning his horse. Nope, just not stupid. There's easier ways to make $1 than bleeding out in some widow's yard. 2 others followed Collins, leaving the odds more even. But the Morrison brothers and 1 remaining man, scarred and mean-looking, stayed put. Your move, Samuel said quietly. But I'll tell you now, you ride away. This ends. You pull iron and win or lose. The survivors will hang. Sheriff Williams is probably already heading this way. Sound carries in this heat. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, in the distance, Clara heard it, horses approaching from the direction of town. Jake Morrison heard it too, his face paling. "This ain't over," Luke spat, but he was already wheeling his horse around. "You can't protect her forever. Hayes." "Watch me," Samuel replied, and something in his voice made Luke kick his horse harder. After they'd gone, Clara emerged from the house, her legs unsteady from the tension. Samuel stood watching the dust settle, his hand still near his gun. "Colorado?" she asked. "Bounty hunting?" He turned to her, and the dangerous man dissolved back into the Samuel she knew. "A man's gotta eat, and after a while, I got good at reading trouble, staying alive." He holstered his gun with practiced ease. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm not—" The admission surprised her. "You've changed. We both have." He looked at her steadily. "Question is whether we've changed too much to find our way back to each other." Before she could answer, Sheriff Williams and 2 deputies rode into the yard. The sheriff, a steady man Clara had known since childhood, took in the scene with knowing eyes. "Got reports of trouble out here," Williams said. "Morrison boys causing problems again?" "Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff," Samuel replied. "All sorted now." Williams studied him. "Samuel Hayes. Heard you were back. Also heard some interesting stories from Colorado way. You planning on bringing that kind of trouble here?" "No, sir. I'm just here to work an honest day and help Miss Bennett with her property. The Morrison boys took exception to that, but I believe they've reconsidered." The sheriff nodded slowly. "See that trouble stays away. This is a peaceable town." He touched his hat to Clara. "Ma'am, you need anything, you send word." After they left, Clara and Samuel stood in the yard, the heat pressing down on them like a weight. "You defended me," she said quietly. "Risked your life for my honor." "I'd do it again." He met her gaze. "And again. As many times as it takes for you to believe that I'm here to stay." She felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight bands she'd wrapped around her heart. "The well's going dry. Without water, I'll lose everything. If you really want to prove yourself." She gestured toward the parched land. "Help me save this place." His face lit up with the first real smile she'd seen since his return. Now that's a challenge worth taking. "We'll need to dig a new well, deeper than the old one. I know some men from the railroad camps who are experts at finding water. It'll take work, though hard work." "When has that ever scared us?" The us slipped out before she could stop it, and she saw him notice, saw the hope flare in his eyes. "Never," he said softly. "It never has." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Clara made a decision. "You can stable your horse here, save you the ride from town each day." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. An acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be mended with enough patience and effort. The drought would test them, threaten everything she'd built. But for the first time in 5 years, she wouldn't face it alone. The attack came at dawn, 3 days after they'd started digging the new well. Clara woke to the sound of horses and shouting, the acrid smell of smoke already seeping through her windows. She grabbed her rifle and rushed outside to find chaos-masked riders circling her property, torches in hand, the barn already starting to smolder. "Samuel!" She couldn't see him anywhere, panic clawing at her throat. He'd been sleeping in the barn loft, insisting on staying close after the Morrison brothers' threats. A figure burst from the barn, coughing but moving with purpose. Samuel had his Winchester in hand, and even through the smoke, she could see the cold fury in his eyes. Without hesitation, he raised the rifle and fired, knocking a torch from one rider's hand. "The house!" he shouted to Clara. "Protect the house!" She understood immediately. The barn was already lost, but if the house burned, everything would be gone. She took position on the porch, her rifle steady despite her racing heart. The raiders, she counted 8 of them, hadn't expected resistance. They'd probably figured on finding a woman alone, easy prey for their cowardice. Instead, they faced two skilled shooters defending their ground. Clara's first shot took a rider's hat off. Her second sent him tumbling from his saddle. Beside the barn, Samuel had taken cover behind the water trough, his rifle speaking in measured intervals. Another raider fell, clutching his shoulder. "Morrison!" Samuel's voice carried over the chaos. "I know that's you behind that mask. Show yourself and face me like a man." The remaining riders wheeled in confusion. Their easy raid turned into a deadly trap. One tried to throw his torch at the house, but Clara's shot caught him center mass, and he toppled backward, the torch falling harmlessly in the dirt. Then she heard it, the thunder of approaching hooves. Sheriff Williams and a full posse crested the hill, drawn by the smoke and gunfire. The raiders scattered like coyotes before wolves, but not all of them made it. The sheriff's men were excellent shots, and 3 more riders fell before the rest disappeared into the dawn shadows. "Clara!" Samuel was beside her suddenly, his hands running over her arms, checking for injury. "Are you hit? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," but her voice shook as the reality set in. "The barn." They turned to watch as the structure collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. Months of hay. Her father's tools, all of it gone. But the animals had been saved. Samuel had gotten them out first. She realized, seeing her horses and milk cow huddled by the corral. Sheriff Williams dismounted, his face grim. "Anyone want to tell me what happened here? Isn't it obvious?" Clara's anger burned hotter than the barn. "They tried to burn us out." The sheriff examined the fallen raiders, pulling masks away. 2 were dead, including the one Clara had shot. She felt no remorse. They'd come to destroy everything she had. The wounded were Morrison associates, men known for hiring out their guns. Jake Morrison. The sheriff identified one of the wounded. "Should have known." He looked at Samuel. "The other Morrison?" "Got away," Samuel said tightly. "But not for long." "Now hold on," Williams warned. "We'll do this legal-like. Jake here will talk once he realizes he's facing a rope. We'll get them all." As the posse dealt with the prisoners and bodies, Samuel and Clara stood watching the barn burn down to embers. Without speaking, he took her hand, and she let him, needing the anchor of human touch after the violence. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "If you hadn't been here..." "Don't!" His grip tightened. "Don't think about what might have been. We survived. That's what matters." The sun climbed higher, revealing the full extent of the damage. The barn was gone, but the house stood untouched. The well-digging equipment was safe, and most importantly, they were alive. "Miss Bennett," Sheriff Williams approached. "I'll need you both to come to town, give statements, and..." He hesitated. "You should know, shooting a man, even in defense of your property, it changes things. People will talk." "Let them," Clara said firmly. "I protected what's mine." But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of what she'd done began to sink in. She'd killed a man. Self-defense or not, she'd taken a life. Her hands started to shake. Samuel noticed immediately. "Sheriff, can the statements wait an hour? Miss Bennett needs some time." Williams nodded, understanding. "1 hour, then I need you both in town." After the posse left with their prisoners, Samuel led Clara to the porch, settling her in her mother's old rocking chair. He disappeared inside and returned with coffee and a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders despite the warming day. "The shaking will pass," he said gently, crouching before her. "First time I had to kill a man, I shook for hours after, thought I'd never stop." "When?" She looked at him through eyes that felt too wide, too vulnerable. 2 years ago, a man named Garrett tried to ambush me outside Cheyenne. It was him or me, and I chose me, but that didn't make it easier." He took her hands in his thumbs rubbing gentle circles. "You did what you had to do, Clara. You protected your home, your life. There's no shame in that." "I don't feel shame," she admitted. "I feel empty and angry. So angry that they forced me to do it. That's good. Hold on to that anger. It'll carry you through. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher. Finally, Clara stirred. We should see what can be salvaged. Together. They picked through the edges of the barn's remains. Her father's anvil had survived. Some tools that had been stored in a metal box, but precious little else. The loss of the hay meant she'd have to sell most of her animals before winter. She couldn't feed them without it. I can get hay, Samuel said, reading her thoughts. I've got money saved from the bounty work. Enough to rebuild the barn, too. I can't take your money. You're not taking it. I'm investing it. He faced her squarely. You asked me to help save this place. Let me help. Pride warred with practicality. Without the barn, without hay, she'd lose everything anyway. It would be a loan, she said finally. With interest, if that's what you need to call it. His smile was gentle, though I'd rather call it a down payment. On what? Our future. The words hung between them, fragile as morning frost. I know I haven't earned the right to say that yet, but I'm working toward... She stopped him with a hand on his arm. One day at a time. Samuel, we survived today. Let's start there. In town, the atmosphere was electric. News of the raid had spread, and people gathered in clusters, discussing the violence that had shattered their peaceful community. Clara held her head high as she walked to the sheriff's office, but she felt the stares, heard the whispers. That's her, someone muttered. Killed a man dead, they say. Defending her property, another countered. What else could she do? Inside the sheriff's office, Jake Morrison sat shackled, his shoulder bandaged, his face twisted with hate when he saw them. You killed Tommy Brewster, he snarled at Clara. He was just trying to make some money. He was trying to burn my home. Clara replied steadily. He made his choice. The statements took 2 hours. Sheriff Williams was thorough, and by the end, Clara felt wrung out. Samuel stayed beside her throughout, a steady presence that she found herself leaning on more than she'd intended. Luke Morrison's disappeared, Williams told them as they prepared to leave. But we'll find him. In the meantime, I'm posting a deputy at your place. That's not necessary, Clara began, but Samuel interrupted. We'll take the help, Sheriff, until this is finished. Outside, the town still buzzed with gossip and speculation. Clara squared her shoulders, ready to face it, but Samuel steered her toward the general store instead. We need supplies if we're going to keep working on that well, he said. And you need to eat something. When's the last time you had a meal? She couldn't remember, and that seemed to decide him. He led her to the small cafe next to the store, ignoring her protests about appearances and propriety. Let them talk, he said, echoing her earlier words. You're the bravest woman I know. Clara Bennett, you faced down 8 armed men and protected your home. If this town can't respect that, then they're fools. Over a simple meal of beef stew and cornbread, Clara felt something fundamental shift between them. The violence of the morning had stripped away pretense, leaving something raw and honest. She'd seen Samuel ready to die defending her property. He'd seen her kill to protect what was hers. There was no room for games or false pride in the face of such truths. Thank you, she said quietly, for being there, for staying. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I told you, Clara, I'm here to stay, however long it takes, whatever it takes. I'm not running again. Looking into his eyes, seeing the man he'd become, scarred, tested, but solid as bedrock, Clara felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. She wasn't ready to forgive completely, wasn't ready to trust with the whole of her heart, but she was ready to stop pushing him away. The barn needs rebuilding, she said, and that well won't dig itself. If you're serious about staying, I'm serious. His grip on her hand tightened, more serious than I've ever been about anything. She nodded slowly. Then we'd better get to work. Winter's coming, and we've got a lot to do. As they left the cafe together, Clara noticed the looks had changed. Where before there had been pity for the abandoned woman, now she saw something different. Respect, perhaps, or wariness. She'd proven she wasn't helpless, wasn't just waiting for a man to save her. She could save herself. But having someone beside her, someone willing to fight for her and with her, that was something different entirely. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Winter arrived early that year, announced by a bitter wind that cut through the valley like a blade. Clara stood at her kitchen window, watching the first snow begin to fall, transforming the scorched earth where the barn had stood into something almost beautiful. They'd managed to build a temporary shelter for the animals, but the proper barn would have to wait until spring. "Storm's going to be a bad one," Samuel said from behind her. He'd been living in the small room off the kitchen for the past month, an arrangement born of necessity after Luke Morrison's continued threats. Sheriff Williams had captured 2 more of the raiders, but Luke remained at large, a shadow that hung over their daily lives. "We've weathered worse," Clara replied, though privately she wondered. The new well had yielded water, sweet and clear and plentiful. But winter brought different challenges. The temporary shelter might not hold against a real blizzard, and their hay supplies, purchased with Samuel's money despite her protests, were barely adequate. "Have we?" He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Together, I mean." She knew what he was really asking. In the weeks since the raid, they'd fallen into a rhythm of shared work and quiet evenings, but she'd maintained a careful distance. The walls around her heart had cracks now, places where his patient presence had worn through, but she hadn't been ready to let them fall completely. "That was different," she said softly. "We were different." "Yes," he agreed. "We were children playing at being grown. Now we know what it really means, the cost of it." The snow was falling harder now, already beginning to accumulate on the fence posts. Clara shivered, though the kitchen was warm. "I need to check on the animals. I'll go." But she was already reaching for her coat. "We'll both go." It came out more sharply than she intended. "This is still my place, Samuel. I won't be coddled." His smile was rueful. "Wouldn't dream of it, though maybe you could let me coddle you just a little, for my own peace of mind." Despite herself, she felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "You can carry the water buckets. That shoulder of yours still pains you in the cold." They worked in companionable silence, securing the animals, checking the makeshift roof, hauling extra water in case the snow made morning chores impossible. The wind picked up, driving snow into their faces, and by the time they stumbled back inside, they were both half frozen. "Get those wet clothes off," Samuel ordered, already stoking the fire higher. "I'll make coffee." Clara retreated to her room to change, her fingers stiff with cold. When she returned, wrapped in a thick shawl, Samuel had coffee waiting and was adding more wood to the fire. He'd changed too, and she tried not to notice how the firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines that 5 years had carved there. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup gratefully. "For the coffee? For staying, for helping, for—" She struggled to find words for the complicated knot of emotions in her chest. "For not pushing, for giving me time." He sat across from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. "You're worth waiting for, Clara. Always have been." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The storm was building into something fierce, the kind that could trap people for days. Clara found she didn't mind the prospect as much as she should have. "Tell me about Colorado," she said suddenly. "The real story, not the bits and pieces you've shared." His expression grew distant. "It's not a pretty tale. I don't need pretty, I need truth." So he told her about the failed mining claim that had taken his first year's savings, about the winter he'd nearly starved, too proud to come home empty-handed, about learning to track men for bounty because it was that or die, and how he'd discovered he had a talent for it, reading people, predicting their moves, staying alive when others wanted him dead. "The worst was in Pueblo," he said, staring into his coffee. 3 brothers who'd robbed a bank, killed 2 men. I tracked them for weeks, finally cornered them in a box canyon. They wouldn't surrender." He paused, his jaw working. I can still see their faces sometimes. Young men, not much older than I'd been when I left here. But they'd chosen their path, and I'd chosen mine. Is that when you decided to come back? No. His smile was sad. I decided to come back the night I left. Every mile away from you felt wrong, but I was too stubborn, too proud to admit I'd made a mistake. Took getting shot in Abilene to finally knock sense into me, lying in that hospital bed. All I could think was that I might die without seeing you again, without trying to make things right. Clara set down her cup, moving to the window where the snow had created a white wall, cutting them off from the world. I hated you for a while. Did you know that? I figured as much. You had every right. No, I need you to understand. She turned to face him. I hated you with every breath. I cursed your name. I wished terrible things would happen to you. And then, her voice caught. Then I'd lie awake terrified that you were dead somewhere, and I'd never know. The not knowing was the worst part. He rose, crossing to her, but stopping just out of reach. I'm sorry. God, Clara, I'm so sorry. If I could take it back. But you can't. She wrapped her arms around herself. And maybe that's not entirely bad. The man who left wouldn't have been able to save my home from those raiders. Wouldn't have known how to dig a well in drought, or track down hay suppliers, or any of the 100 things you've done since you returned. Are you saying you're glad I left? There was pain in his voice. No. She met his eyes. I'm saying we can't change the past. We can only decide what to do with the present. The storm chose that moment to unleash its full fury. The windows shook under the assault, and somewhere outside, something crashed, probably part of the temporary shelter. They both started for the door, but Samuel caught her arm. We can't go out in this. We'd be lost 10 feet from the door. He was right. The storm had become a white monster, devouring everything in its path. Clara pressed against the window, trying to see, but there was nothing but swirling snow. The animals are smarter than us. They'll huddle together, backs to the wind. We did what we could. Frustration and worry made her snap. This is exactly what I mean. I can't even protect my own stock. What kind of rancher am I? The kind who's kept this place running alone for 5 years. The kind who fought off raiders and killed to defend what's hers. The kind who's too stubborn to know when she's beaten and too strong to stay down when she falls. His hands gripped her shoulders, turning her to face him. You're magnificent, Clara Bennett, and I was a fool to ever leave you. Something in his voice, in the fierce pride in his eyes when he looked at her, broke through the last of her defenses. Samuel, I love you. The words came out rough, desperate. I never stopped. Not for one day, not for 1 minute. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but She kissed him. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a need that overwhelmed thought. His lips were as she remembered, but the kiss itself was different, deeper, tinged with loss and longing and the hard-won knowledge of what truly mattered. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw wonder in his eyes. Clara, I'm tired of being angry, she whispered. I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of pretending I don't still love you when you're all I've thought about for 5 years. He made a sound that might have been her name or a prayer. And then his arms were around her, holding her like she might disappear. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and wood smoke and home. I can't promise it'll be easy, she said against his shirt. The trust, it's going to take time to rebuild. I know. He pressed his lips to her hair. I'm not going anywhere. However long it takes. Whatever you need. I'll prove myself to you every day if that's what it takes. They stood there as the storm raged outside, holding each other in the circle of warmth and light. For the first time in 5 years, Clara felt complete. Not healed. That would take time, but whole in a way she'd forgotten was possible. We should conserve wood, she said eventually, though she made no move to leave his arms. This storm could last days. His hold tightened slightly. In a minute. She smiled against his chest. The Samuel I knew was more practical than this. The Samuel you knew was an idiot who thought gold mattered more than love. I've learned better. They did eventually separate, working together to prepare for a long siege. They brought in extra wood, filled every available container with water in case the pump froze, and cooked a large pot of stew that could be reheated as needed. But there was a new ease between them now, casual touches and shared smiles that warmed Clara more than the fire. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of abating. They sat close on the small sofa, listening to the wind's fury, sharing stories of the years apart. Clara told him about her parents' deaths, the long nights of grief, the struggle to keep the ranch going. He shared more tales from his travels, the people he'd met, the lessons learned through hardship. I wrote you letters in my head, he admitted. Every night, told you about what I'd seen, asked your advice, shared my fears. You were with me even when you weren't. I talked to you too. Clara confessed. Argued with you, mostly. Told you exactly what I thought of your leaving. But also asked your opinion on things. Wondered what you'd think of decisions I made. What did I say? Usually that I was being too stubborn. She smiled. You were generally right. The wind screamed like a living thing, and somewhere in the house, something creaked ominously. But inside their circle of light, Clara felt safer than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Storm damage to repair, animals to tend, the ongoing threat of Luke Morrison. But tonight, she had this: warmth, companionship, and the first fragile shoots of renewed love. I should check the bedrooms, she said as the hour grew late. Make sure the windows are holding. I'll help. They went through the house together, checking for drafts, adding blankets to windows where the cold seeped through. In what had been her parents' room, now closed off to save heat. Clara paused. They would have liked you coming back, she said quietly. Pa, especially. He always said you had good bones. Just needed seasoning. I'm sorry I wasn't here for you when they passed. You couldn't have known. She closed the door gently. Besides, I needed to face that alone, to prove I could. You proved that and more. He caught her hand as they headed back to the warmth of the kitchen. You're the strongest person I know. Clara. The compliment warmed her, but she shook her head. Not strong, just too stubborn to quit. Same thing, in my book. As they settled back by the fire, Clara made a decision. You don't have to sleep in that cold little room tonight. The sofa's big enough, and we'll need to share the warmth anyway. His eyes widened slightly, but he just nodded. Practical as always. Practical. She agreed, though they both knew it was more than that. It was trust, rebuilding slowly but surely, like the new barn they'd raise come spring. Outside, winter raged on, trying to devour the world. But inside, two people who'd been broken apart were slowly, carefully, finding their way back together. It would take time. Trust was harder to rebuild than barns, and hearts slower to mend than bones. But as Clara drifted off to sleep, Samuel's steady breathing beside her, she thought they might just make it. The storm would pass, spring would come, and maybe, just maybe, love could grow again in ground that had known such drought. The letter from the bank arrived on a deceptively peaceful morning, 2 weeks after the great storm. Clara stood frozen in her doorway, staring at the official seal, the carefully worded threats wrapped in legal language. 30 days to pay the full amount of her father's loan, or the ranch would be seized for auction. $300, she whispered, the number hitting her like a physical blow. How could there be $300 still owed? Samuel took the letter from her trembling hands, his face darkening as he read. Interest, he said grimly, compounded over the years. Your father borrowed $100 5 years ago. Looks like Peterson at the bank has been creative with the calculations. Clara sank into a chair, her mind racing. She'd been making payments faithfully, but small ones, all she could manage while keeping the ranch running. She'd thought she had more time, years more. To pay it off gradually? Morrison, Samuel said suddenly. Luke Morrison's family has ties to the bank. This isn't coincidence. The truth of it hit her like ice water. Of course, Luke couldn't attack her directly anymore, not with the sheriff watching. So he'd found another way. Legal, untouchable, devastating. $300? She laughed, but it was a broken sound. I don't have $30, much less $300. The raid, the barn burning, buying feed for winter. She pressed her palms against her eyes. They've won. No! Samuel's voice was fierce. Not while I'm breathing. What can you do? What can anyone do? It's legal. The debt is real. The fight drained out of her, leaving only exhaustion. Maybe it's time to accept. Never. He knelt before her, taking her hands. You asked me to prove my love. Let me do this. I have money saved. Almost $200 from the bounty work. We'll find the rest. Samuel, no, I can't take. You're not taking. I'm giving. There's a difference. His grip tightened. What good is money if I lose you? If I lose this place that means everything to you? She wanted to protest further, but the truth was she had no other options. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford if it meant losing her parents' legacy. It's still not enough. We need another $100 in 30 days. Then we'll find it. He stood, pacing now, thinking. The horses, we could sell one of the horses. They're worth maybe $40 for the pair, and we need them both for spring planting. Clara felt hopelessness creeping in. There's nothing else of value except the land itself. Your mother's ring, Samuel suggested quietly. Clara's hand went instinctively to her chest where the ring hung on a chain, hidden beneath her dress. Her mother's wedding ring. The last piece of her she had. No. Clara, no. The word came out sharp, final. I'll lose the land before I lose that. He nodded, understanding. They sat in heavy silence, each trying to think of options that didn't exist. Then Samuel stood abruptly. I need to go to town, check on something. Samuel, but he was already reaching for his coat. Trust me, please, just trust me. After he left, Clara wandered the house like a ghost. Every room held memories. Her mother teaching her to sew by this window, her father reading by that fire, Samuel himself helping to build these very walls in happier times. In 30 days, it would all belong to the bank. To Luke Morrison's family, most likely, who would take pleasure in throwing her off the land she'd fought so hard to keep. She found herself in the small room Samuel had been using, and her eye caught something tucked beneath his saddlebags, a leather folder, worn and water-stained. She shouldn't look, but worry overrode propriety. Inside were papers, bounty notices, receipts, and a small leather journal. She opened it with trembling fingers, finding pages of Samuel's tight handwriting. Her name leapt out at her from every page. Clara would love this sunset. Saw a woman at the market today with Clara's way of walking. 3 years gone. Wonder if Clara still wears her hair in that braid when she works. Got shot today. All I could think was I might die without telling Clara I'm sorry. Page after page of a man carrying his love like a weight, like a treasure, through years of exile. She was crying before she realized it, hot tears splashing on the worn pages. The last entry was dated the week before he'd returned. Going home tomorrow. God help me. I'm terrified. What if she can't forgive me? What if I'm too late? But I have to try. A man can't live with half his soul missing forever. She was still sitting there, clutching the journal, when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Her heart jumped. Had Morrison come to gloat? But when she looked out the window, she saw Samuel returning with 3 men she didn't recognize. She met them in the yard, the journal still in her hand. Samuel's eyes went to it, something vulnerable flashing across his face, but he simply nodded. Clara, these are friends from my time in Colorado. Jim Patterson, Will Carson, and Doc Hartley. The men touched their hats respectfully. They were hard-looking men, wearing their guns like familiar tools, but their eyes were kind. Sam told us about your trouble. Patterson said, we owe him our lives twice over from various scrapes. Figure it's time to pay some of that back." "I don't understand," Clara began. But Samuel interrupted. "There's a ranch about 50 miles north, the Garrett place. Man who owns it has been losing cattle to rustlers, offering good money for protection. These boys and I can handle it. Have the rustlers caught or run off in 2 weeks. The pay." He met her eyes. "The pay is $150, split 4 ways, but the boys here have agreed to let me take a larger share, enough to cover what we need." "No," the word came out automatically. "It's dangerous. You could be killed." "Could be," Carson agreed cheerfully, "but probably not. We're pretty good at this sort of thing. Besides," Doc added, "Sam saved my life in Pueblo. Been looking for a way to balance that ledger." Clara looked at Samuel, seeing the determination in his eyes. "This is why you went to town. To wire them. I told you I'd find a way." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I know you hate the idea. But it's 2 weeks. Clara, 2 weeks to save everything you've worked for." She wanted to refuse, wanted to rail against the unfairness of it all. But the journal weight in her hands reminded her of all the risks he'd already taken, all the years he'd already lost. And she knew, with crushing certainty, that he would go whether she blessed it or not. This was his chance to prove himself in the way he understood, through action, through sacrifice. 2 weeks, she repeated numbly. "I'll leave the money I have here in case you need it. The boys and I will ride out tonight, best to get there quickly." He caught her hands. The journal pressed between them. "I'll come back. Clara, I swear it. That's what you said last time." The words slipped out before she could stop them. His face tightened with pain, but he nodded. "I did, and I kept that promise. Even if it took too long, I'll keep this one too." The men gave them privacy, moving toward the corral to check their horses. Clara found herself gripping Samuel's hands like a lifeline. "I read it," she said, indicating the journal. "All of it. Then you know." His voice was rough. "You know I never stopped." "I know." She pulled him close, not caring who might see. "Come back to me. Not in 5 years, not in 5 months. 2 weeks. Samuel Hayes, or I'll come looking for you myself." His arms came around her, holding her like she was everything precious in the world. 2 weeks, he promised against her hair. "And then we'll have the rest of our lives." They stayed that way until Patterson cleared his throat. "We should ride. Sam, want to make distance before dark." Clara forced herself to step back, to let him go. But before he could turn away, she reached behind her neck, unclasping the chain that held her mother's ring. "Take this," she said, pressing it into his hand. "For luck, and to remind you what you're coming back to." He stared at the ring like she'd handed him a miracle. "Clara, I can't." "You can. You will." She closed his fingers around it. 2 weeks. She watched them ride out as the sun began its descent. 4 men heading into danger for the sake of a woman and a piece of land. Samuel looked back once, raising his hand, and she waved until they were lost to distance and dust. That night, alone again in the too quiet house, Clara sat by the fire with Samuel's journal. She read every entry, tracing the path of his exile, understanding finally the weight he'd carried. He'd left a boy chasing dreams of fortune. He'd returned a man who understood that fortune meant nothing without love. 2 weeks, she whispered to the empty room. "You hear me, Samuel Hayes. 2 weeks." But even as she said it, dread settled in her stomach like lead. The Morrison family had already proved they'd stop at nothing to destroy her. What if they learned about Samuel's mission? What if this was just another trap? She spent the night by the window, her father's rifle across her lap, watching the road. Somewhere out there, the man she loved was riding toward danger again. But this time, he was riding for her, for them, for the future they might build together. All she could do was wait. Again. But this time, she knew with bone-deep certainty that he would return. He had to, because now she'd finally admitted what she'd known all along, that without him, even keeping the ranch would be a hollow victory. "Come back to me. She prayed to the star-filled sky. "Come back, and this time, I'll never let you go." The wind whispered across the empty plains, carrying her words into the night, and somewhere in the darkness, a man with a wedding ring in his pocket rode on, determined to prove that some loves were worth any risk, any sacrifice, any amount of patient waiting. 2 weeks. The countdown began. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the prairie, painting the landscape in blues and yellows and purples that seemed to celebrate life itself. Clara stood in her vegetable garden, hands deep in the rich soil, planting seeds for the season ahead. The simple gold band on her finger caught the morning light as she worked. "You're going to wear yourself out before breakfast." Samuel called from where he was reinforcing the new barn's frame. They'd been working since dawn, racing to complete the structure before the full heat of summer arrived. "Says the man who was up before the roosters," she countered, but smiled as she said it. These gentle morning exchanges had become precious to her, proof that they'd survived everything the world had thrown at them. It had been 3 months since that terrible 2 weeks of waiting. 3 months since Samuel had returned with the money that saved their ranch. He'd come back injured, a bullet graze across his ribs and a knife wound in his thigh, but alive and triumphant. The rustlers had been caught, the Garrett ranch saved, and their future secured. She remembered that moment when she'd seen him riding back, silhouetted against the sunset. She'd run to meet him, not caring about propriety or appearances. And he'd caught her up despite his injuries, spinning her around while she cried and laughed and scolded him all at once. "Marry me," he'd said, still holding her. "Right now, today, tomorrow. But soon, I can't spend another night without you being my wife." She'd said yes before he'd even finished asking. The wedding had been small, just a few close friends and Sheriff Williams as witness. Clara had worn her mother's dress, altered to fit, and Samuel had stood before her with tears in his eyes as they exchanged vows in the little church where her parents had married decades before. "Mrs. Hayes," Samuel called now, the title still making her heart skip. "You promised to let me know when you need help." "I'm planting vegetables, not moving boulders," she protested. But she straightened, pressing a hand to her back. The work was satisfying, but she'd been at it for 2 hours already. He crossed to her, pulling her against him despite her dirt-covered hands. "What would the town gossips say if they saw you working so hard? Probably the same things they've always said, that Clara Bennett Hayes now is too stubborn for her own good." She leaned into his warmth, though they say it with more respect these days. That was true. The story of their struggles had spread through Cedar Ridge and beyond. The woman who'd waited 5 years for her cowboy, who'd fought off raiders and killed to defend her home. The man who'd returned to prove his love through blood and sacrifice. They'd become something of a legend. Though Clara found the attention embarrassing. "They should respect you," Samuel murmured against her hair. "You're the strongest woman in the territory." Flatterer. But she smiled. "How's the barn coming?" "Another week, maybe 2. Jim and Will promised to come help with the roof raising." His friends had stayed in the area, taking work at various ranches. They'd become regular visitors, bringing news and laughter to the homestead. Clara turned in his arms to survey their progress. The barn frame stood strong against the sky, bigger and better than the one they'd lost. The ranch showed signs of prosperity everywhere. Healthy cattle in the pastures, the new windmill turning lazily, the garden already showing green shoots of promise. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." "You did it," he corrected. "You held on when anyone else would have given up. I just came back in time to help with the last part." She shook her head. "We did it together. That's how it'll be from now on. Together." A dust cloud on the road caught their attention. Samuel tensed automatically, his hand moving to his hip where his gun rested. Old habits died hard, and Luke Morrison had never been caught, though rumors placed him in Mexico, running from murder charges. But the approaching rider was Sheriff Williams, and his expression was pleased rather than grim. "Morning, folks," he called. dismounting. "Got some news you might want to hear?" Clara felt Samuel's arm tighten around her. "Morrison? Dead," William said it simply. "Tried to rob a bank in El Paso. Local sheriff shot him down. Thought you'd want to know it's really over." Clara waited to feel something. Relief, satisfaction, maybe even pity. But there was only a sense of closure, of a chapter finally ending. "Thank you for telling us." Williams nodded. "Also wanted to let you know. The town council's been talking. After everything that happened, how you both handled yourselves, there's been discussion about appointing a deputy out this way, someone to keep an eye on the outlying ranches." He looked at Samuel meaningfully. "Interested?" Samuel glanced at Clara, reading her expression. "Thanks, Sheriff, but no, my deputying days are behind me. I'm a rancher now." "Thought you might say that." William smiled. "Can't blame a man for trying. You two take care now." After he left, they stood together in comfortable silence. The morning was warming, promising a beautiful day, and there was work waiting. But for just a moment, they allowed themselves to simply be two people who'd found their way back to each other against all odds. "No regrets?" Clara asked. "About the deputy position, it would have been steady money." "None." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I spent 5 years chasing what I thought I needed. Turns out everything I need is right here." She kissed him then, sweet and slow, tasting promise and permanence. When they parted, she touched the scar on his jaw, the one he'd earned in those lost years. "The barn won't build itself," she said, but made no move to step away. "The vegetables won't plant themselves either," he countered, equally reluctant to move. They laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie like music. Then, hand in hand, they returned to their work, building their future one board, one seed, one shared moment at a time. As the sun climbed higher, neighbors began arriving. Word had spread that the Hays were raising a barn, and in the tradition of the frontier, people came to help. Men brought tools and muscle, women brought food and gossip. Children played in the yard where violence had once erupted. Clara found herself in her kitchen with Mrs. Henderson and Martha Stevens, preparing food for the workers. The same women who'd once pitied her now sought her advice, treated her with the respect due a woman who'd proven her mettle. "Must be nice," Martha said, kneading bread dough. "Having your man back home where he belongs." "It is," Clara agreed simply, watching through the window as Samuel directed the barn raising. He moved with confidence now, the hesitancy of his first weeks back long gone. This was his land too now, their shared dream made real. "My herald says Samuel's changed," Mrs. Henderson observed. "Says he's not the boy who left, but something harder, more dangerous." Clara considered that. "He's seen things, done things. It changes a person." She met the older woman's eyes. "But his heart's the same. That's what matters." The women nodded, understanding in a way they couldn't have before. The frontier demanded transformation, turned boys into men and girls into women through trial and hardship. Those who survived were forever marked by it. By afternoon, the barn walls were up, and the mood was festive. Someone brought out a fiddle, and music filled the air. Children danced, couples swayed together, and, for a moment, the hard life of the frontier gave way to simple joy. Samuel found Clara in the crowd, pulling her into his arms for a dance despite her protests about being too dirty from cooking. "You're beautiful," he said, spinning her carefully. "Dirt and all." "Samuel Hays, you're making a spectacle." She protested, but she was laughing. "Let them look. Let them see how much I love my wife." He dipped her dramatically, earning cheers from the crowd as the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The neighbors gradually departed. The barn stood nearly complete, lacking only shingles and finishing touches. Tomorrow they'd return to complete the work, but tonight was for rest and reflection. Clara and Samuel sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night was warm, full of spring promises and the distant sound of coyotes. She waited 5 years for the cowboy who left her. Clara murmured, echoing the words that had become part of their story. When he returned, She made him prove his love. And did he? Samuel asked, though his smile said he knew the answer. Every day, she replied, taking his hand. He proves it every single day. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd traveled long roads to find their way back to each other. The ranch spread out before them. Their land, their future, their hard-won happy ending. I love you, Clara Hayes, Samuel said into the quiet night. And I love you, Samuel Hayes. Always have, always will. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had endured separation, trials, and the harsh realities of frontier life. In the new barn, an owl hooted, claiming its home. The windmill creaked gently in the breeze. And on the porch of a small ranch house in Cedar Ridge, two souls sat entwined, finally and forever home. The Wild West had tested them, shaped them, nearly broken them. But in the end, it had given them something precious, a love tempered by fire, strong as forged steel, and enduring as the mountains themselves. They'd written their story in sweat and tears and blood, and now they had the rest of their lives to write the chapters that came next. Together, always together. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please share your location in the comments so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Samuel's journey. Your comments and stories mean everything to us.